Hello, my friends. There is some new research that shows that ancient astrologers sometimes used the true node. Whoa! This contradicts what we thought we knew. For decades, there's this idea in astrology that the true node was discovered or invented, however you want to put it. People came up with the idea of the true node around the 1970s. So it's a very new idea. And before that, everybody used the mean node. So you have this feeling like there's the mean node for thousands of years. And then this new kid on the block comes around in the 1970s or 1980s called the true node. Well, that's what we thought. But in 2021, some research was done, not by astrologers, but by people who study ancient history. I'll show you in a minute exactly what it is. They discovered that, ancient astrologers sometimes used a kind of a true node. And when you go back and you look at the charts that some of the ancient astrologers did, they are not using the mean node. So this idea that they were always using a mean node is not true. Some ancient astrologers used the mean node and some did not. Okay. Wow, let's take a breath and review what I just said, because it's very surprising. Let me just repeat. We always thought, astrologers who are fairly well educated, including myself, we always thought everybody used the mean node until the 1970s, and now we know this is not true. Just an interesting thing to know about. Also interesting is that in vibrational astrology, we use the true node, and I recently made a series of videos showing that the true node really is the observed node. It really is where the node is in the sky. A very strong argument for it. And now we're seeing even more evidence to support the true node in so far as there are people who just are skeptical of something that's introduced in the late 20th century after thousands of years of using something different. Well, if that's your perspective, now that perspective changes a lot because it's not true that people just only use the mean node. Okay, let's look at this. So here in this slide, I repeat what I just said. It is widely accepted in astrology and appears in many books, lectures, classes that the moon's mean node was used in ancient times. And in modern times, late 20th century, the true node was introduced. And now we have evidence that in ancient times we're going to see means anything really before 1800, going all the way back to at least 1400 and probably much, much earlier. Some astrologers used a node that we could call a mean node. It matches very close to the modern mean node calculation. And some used a moon's node with a variable speed. You know that the mean node is fairly constant in its speed. Well, not all ancient astrologers calculated a moon's node that had this extremely constant speed. They had one that varied in speed. The modern true node can actually go direct at times. So it's usually retrograde and then sometimes direct, just like Mercury, Venus, Mars are usually direct and sometimes retrograde. It's opposite with the modern calculation of the true node, which is, as I've said before, it is the accurate position of the true node. It sometimes goes direct. Now, the ancient true node was not calculated as accurately as the modern one. It never goes direct, but it does go faster retrograde at times and slower retrograde. Okay, let's see the evidence that indicates that the ancient astrologers, some of them used a true node, believe it or not. Contradicts everything we thought we knew. But that's the way of knowledge, of increasing understanding. Sometimes we learn things that contradict what we thought we knew. Usually it just refines what our understanding, but sometimes we learn it's quite a bit different. Okay, so let's learn some of the ways that the ancient astrologers calculated the positions of planets and the moon's nodes. And We'll learn when and why the mean node and true node were introduced, and we'll look at some ancient charts to see that they didn't always use the mean node. So what we see when we look at the charts confirms the evidence from this new research in the year 2021. Now, first of all, the moon's nodes. How long have astrologers been calculating the moon's nodes? They've been calculating the moon's nodes since really the beginning of astrology. So the ancient Babylonians could predict eclipses fairly accurately. Nearly 4,000 years ago, or maybe even more than 4,000 years, at least close to 4,000 years ago. Here's a website address that talks about that. Now, how were people able 4,000 years ago to predict when eclipses would occur? Well, there's several things that help with that. One is that if you go out and you look at the moon every night and see where it is, and you know where the path of the sun is, the ecliptic plane, because the sun goes through the same stars in the background every year, very, very consistently. And all the planets, all the visible planets that people used in ancient times, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and also the moon, move up and down. They waver farther and closer to the ecliptic plane. That's the ecliptic latitude. And the ecliptic latitude was extremely well known all the way back thousands of years ago, because it's obvious if you're a sky watcher and you see what's going on. And it's not too difficult to notice that when the moon is on the ecliptic plane, or what we can call zero latitude, and if the moon happens to be conjunct the sun, that's when an eclipse occurs, which is kind of obvious because the sun's always on the ecliptic plane. So the point where the moon crosses, or we could say intersects, the ecliptic plane, that point is critically powerful, because that's the point where an eclipse occurs, and eclipses were always considered to be highly dramatic, powerful events. I mean, physically, they're powerful, at least in some parts of the world, where the light of the sun gets blotted out, or the moon, full moon for a period of time, it disappears. So they're always considered to be very powerful and important, kind of huge omens in the sky. And astronomers knew that it would occur when the moon was at zero latitude, and that could be observed over long periods of time, and they figured out the Saros cycle and all these cycles for predicting eclipses. Okay, so number one, the moon's nodes were very important from the earliest days, and they were observed very carefully, and they are very important to astrologers. That's the point I want to make. So the moon's nodes are not some like abstract, vague point. They are the critical, powerful things that help predict when eclipses will occur, and eclipses were among the most important things that could happen in the sky. Now, the heliocentric model is the next thing I want to talk about. Is at various times people had an idea of a heliocentric model, but it never really caught on. It didn't become the powerful and dominant idea about how planets move in the sky. The geocentric model remained the basic way that astronomers understood how the sky works. It looks like everything is going around us, and that was the understanding. In the 1500s, Copernicus made very strong arguments for the heliocentric model. And then in 1605 and 1609 were 2 years where Johannes Kepler published some books with his new laws of planetary motion based on the heliocentric model. These laws of planetary motion determine where the planets are more accurately than the formulas that were used for literally thousands of years. Since the time of Ptolemy, astrologers had a way of determining where the planets are based on a geocentric model, and Kepler's laws of planetary motion based on the heliocentric model or you could say determine the positions of the planets more accurately. So it's a better formula, and it replaced that formula that existed for at least 2,000 years to determine where planet positions will be. So to summarize, medieval astrologers and other ancient astrologers used the geocentric model of the solar system. There were a few people who proposed a heliocentric model or some other model, but the geocentric model was dominant. Ptolemy developed this theory of what are called epicycles, which are like little circles within circles. And these circles within circles, these epicycles, were used to predict when a planet would slow down, speed up, and even appear to be going retrograde. And these epicycles did a fairly good job at determining where the planets would be. Not perfect by a long shot, but better than just, using like an average motion. So you had this idea in ancient times that there was a general overall speed, like a big gear in the sky, a big wheel in the sky, and then little wheels that would cause the planet to speed up and slow down. And that was the idea that was used. It's actually not true. These epicycles do not exist. We now know that the planets are not like going through all these multiple circular motions. It's much simpler than that. They're just going around the sun, and they speed up and slow down when they get near each other. It's gravitational attraction. So the mechanism is different from what the ancients thought, but the ancient formulas did help get the planetary positions a little more accurate than would be if they didn't have these epicycles. And generally, it would get the planet positions within about 2 degrees. Actually, Mercury can be off 5 or 6 degrees using Ptolemy's epicycle theory. Venus usually within about 2 degrees. Most of the other planets pretty accurate. Now, the third bullet point here. This is really interesting. In the year 1900, somebody was doing some deep sea diving, found this big chunk of bronze stuff down there, and they brought it up and analyzed it, and it was all in pieces and put it together. And by the 1970s, it became clear that this thing called the Antikythera or Antikythera mechanism, it was a machine, a set of gears, like all these interlocking gears to calculate planetary positions. It's like an engineering device, like a big clock that can actually determine where the planets will be at any given time. And it's a fairly complex, there's like gears within gears within gears. It's amazing. What's also amazing is that we have no literature about it. There's some vague references to it. So the bottom line is that a lot of what people were doing in ancient times is lost. All the burning of the libraries and other loss of information. And they actually developed this very sophisticated tool to determine where planets are. And if it didn't end up at the bottom of the ocean and people dig it up in the year 1900 and researchers spending huge numbers of hours trying to figure out this thing, we would never even know that they had this. And what we don't know is all of the theory experiments and all of the research or ideas or whatever they were doing to build this thing. But we know they built it, we have it, and it's getting continually researched. And in the year 2021, some researchers analyzing all these gears and how this thing fits together have come up with a more detailed and accurate understanding of how this mechanism was used. So, again, it's an extremely detailed and elaborate brass tool with all these interlocking gears. And so the effort that was put in to determine planetary positions is enormous. It's just unbelievable that they built this Antikythera mechanism and the level of intricacy that it has. So obviously people put a huge amount of work and effort into trying to get planetary positions accurate. Enormous amount of effort. It's not like just a few people, like Ptolemy saying, oh, well, I bet there's cycles within cycles, and that was it. A lot of playing around and resizing of this because it works very accurately. According to the researchers who have analyzed this Antikythera mechanism, they are impressed by its accuracy and the sophistication and complexity of it. This also gives us some sense of why Kepler was so ecstatic. I'm going to read to you later what Kepler says about his discovery of the laws of planetary motion, especially after he discovered the third law. He's in like this ecstatic reverie about how this has been eluding people since ancient Egypt, and understanding how long and hard people have tried to figure out planetary positions gives us an appreciation for the fact that Kepler is right, that this was an extraordinary achievement after thousands of years of people trying to figure out planetary positions, and Kepler comes up with a new understanding that surpasses all the previous work. I'm mentioning all this. What does all this have to do with the true node and mean node? What it has to do with the true node and mean node is that there's a long, hard battle to figure out where the planets are and also where the moon's node is. And that's why I was talking about the importance of eclipses and the moon's node. It's just as important, you could say, as the planets. And so there was this battle. It's not some like trivial little thing and one or two people just saying, oh, well, this is what we think the position of the planets is and the position of the moon's node is. It's a long, hard battle going on, you could say, over generations, building the Antikythera mechanism and coming up with these formulas. That is very clear. I don't really think that's debatable, that there's this long process going on over generations. Now, here is what Kepler said, what he wrote after he discovered this third law of motion. This is really amazing, the reverie that he's in. So to quote from this book, I've got the website address at the bottom, this big long address from books.google.com. And the author says, we only have to remember what is perhaps the most ecstatic expression of joy and discovery in the annals of science. Here is Kepler on his discovery of the third planetary law, and now he's going to quote Kepler. So he's saying this is the most ecstatic statement. By the way, I typed this in. I see a few typos here and there. Okay, let me read what Kepler wrote. What I prophesied 22 years ago, as soon as I found the heavenly orbits were of the same number as the 5 regular solids, that I fully believed long before I had seen Ptolemy's harmonics, what I promised my friends in the name of this book, which I christened before I was 16 years old, what I urge as an end to be sought, and for which I joined Tycho Brahe, for which I settled in Prague, for which I spent most of my life at astronomical calculations. At last I have brought to light and seen to be true beyond my fondest hopes. It is not 18 months since I saw the first ray of light, 3 months since the unclouded sun-glorious sight burst upon me. I will triumph over mankind by the honest confession that I have stolen the golden vases of the Egyptians to raise a tabernacle for my God far away from the lands of Egypt. If you forgive me, I rejoice. If you are angry, I cannot help it. The book is written, the die is cast. Let it be read now or by posterity. I care not which. It may well wait a century for a reader, as it has waited 6,000 years for an observer. Wow. He's stolen the golden vases of the Egyptians to raise a tabernacle for his God. He has discovered the secret, sacred formula of the heavens. Wow. By the way, he says, long before I had seen Ptolemy's harmonics, a lot of people don't know that Ptolemy wrote on the harmonics, the music of the spheres was part of Ptolemy's work. In astrology today, we think of Ptolemy with his 5 basic aspects. So anyway, if you weren't familiar with that, that's why he's referring to that. Okay, so now we can appreciate that there is a reasonable context for why Kepler is so ecstatic and in this reverie. It was a battle of humanity to understand how the heavens function, and he figured it out. These 3 laws of planetary motion, and the third one is kind of the finale. It's the, what do we say? The icing on the cake, the cherry on top, whatever. It was the final triumph. Okay, all of this is relevant to understanding how the nodes were calculated in ancient times, because you realize that there was this ongoing effort, this ongoing work to determine the planet positions and the node positions more accurately. Now here's the breakthrough. In March 2021, and I'm quoting from scientificamerican.com, I've got the website address at the bottom if you want to go there and read about this in more detail. Here's what this researcher says. This is one of the leading people who is taking these x-rays and images and recreating and working with it and understanding the astronomy. And this is what he discovers and his team in 2021. The Antikythera has a mechanism for the variable motion of the sun and an epicyclic mechanism for calculating the nodes of the moon. Whoa. What he's saying is that what they found out, and they published in March of 2021, is that the Antikythera was not used only for planet positions. It was also for calculating the nodes of the moon. This means that epicycles, the speeding up and slowing down of the planets, because without epicycles, the planets are moving in a nearly constant speed. You might say a mean position. There's like a mean position, an average position of Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the nodes. And the ancient astrologers, ancient meaning up until Kepler's work in the early 1600s, all the way up until then, from at least the time of Ptolemy and probably earlier, so for that, at least 1,500 years, everybody knows planets speed up and slow down, or appear to be as we look up at them in the sky, geocentric positions, and they had these epicycles to approximate those changes in speed and even going retrograde, and they applied it to the moon's nodes. This means the moon's nodes did not move at a constant speed, according to all astrologers, because many astrologers were using the Antikythera. They had to be. They wouldn't be building this big, complex brass thing that was so accurate and complex and intricate and nobody using it. It was obviously a model to predict where the planets would be. So that Antikythera mechanism is doing the equivalent of what we do today with modern planetary theory, understanding of how planets speed up and slow down through this epicycles. Bottom line is, the mean node is a node that moves at an almost constant retrograde speed. The Antikythera mechanism, used by the astronomer and astrologers in ancient times, calculated a moon's node that sped up and slowed down just like the other planets. So, and it plays a major part in the Antikythera. So, let me read this again. The Antikythera has a mechanism for the variable motion of the sun and an epicyclic mechanism for calculating the nodes of the moon, the points at which the moon's orbit cuts through the plane of the ecliptic, making an eclipse possible. As astrologers, we know about that. I just described that. Eclipses happen only when the sun is close to one of these nodes during a full new moon. I just discussed that. Medieval and Renaissance astronomers called the double-ended pointer for the nodes of the moon a dragon hand, or actually we often say dragon head. But anyway, different translations, basic idea, the dragon, the moon's nodes. The epicyclic, listen, and I got this I put it in bold because this makes it very clear. The epicyclic gearing, and these are gears, just like watch gears. The epicyclic gearing for this dragon hand also exactly explained a prominent bearing on one of the spokes that had previously appeared to have no function. We had finally explained all the features of the main drive wheel. We published our findings in March 2021 in Scientific Reports. So there was one part of the Antikythera that they couldn't understand, and then they realized, oh, it's to adjust the position of the moon's node. There you have it. It's very clear. Great, huge, important discovery in 2021 that the astronomers and astrologers, they were the same thing in ancient times. Astronomers were astrologers. Used a variable moon's position. They assumed the variable moon's node position, just like they did for all of the planets. That's a true node. A true node just means the idea that the position of the node, of the moon's node, is speeding up and slowing down. That something is causing it to not just have this smooth motion. And all of the planets, not just the nodes, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, everything was understood to speed up and slow down according to the epicycles. So they used the same theory for the planets that they used for the nodes. Wow. They used a true node. That's why the node in many of the ancient charts is not the mean node. I mean, we should have figured this out before this discovery in 2021, because if you look at the ancient charts, many of the nodes don't match the mean node. Just bring up the chart in your software and you look at the hand-drawn chart wheel. Some of them do have a mean node and some do not. Most of the ones I've looked at do not. Why wouldn't they get the mean node accurate? The mean node's very easy to calculate. Well, I'm going to show you, or I'm going to discuss some more, that in one ancient book, ancient meaning 15th century book, where some of the charts have a node that matches the mean node and some do not match. So there was no problem in calculating the mean node. They could calculate it, but they didn't always choose to. So everything fits together. They had the mechanism, the Antikythera. We see the charts that sometimes are a mean node and sometimes are not. If some of the charts were not a mean node, then we might think, well, maybe they had problem calculating it. No, they could calculate it. Much easier to calculate the moon's mean node than the planets. And they did do it. So some ancient astrologers used a mean moon's node and some did not. So these findings published in March 2021 confirm how at least some ancient astrologers calculated the moon's nodes. They used the Antikythera, which is consistent with Ptolemy's theory of epicycles, to not only predict the position of the moon and planets, but also the moon's nodes. This is a moon's node with variable speed. It is a kind of true node that is not as accurate as today's true node, just as the planet positions were also, quote, true planet positions. Wow. In other words, the ancient astrologers just want to know where these things are in the sky. Where the heck is Mercury? They want to know where it is. And they want to know where the node is. So we're going true just means the observed, the actual, or apparent, whatever term you want to use. Where is the thing in the sky? And to figure out where the moon's node is, they sometimes use a variable speed, just like they did for the planets. They used a true node. True node just means just like the planets, their actual position. So 2 important points. The mean node is not, well, here's another thing. Whoa. Point number 1. Keep in mind that the mean node is not exactly conjunct the sun and moon at a total solar eclipse or lunar eclipse. The clearest definition, the completely unambiguous definition of the moon's node is it is where the moon is at a total eclipse. That is completely clear. That's what everybody agrees on. And the mean node is not even there. It's not there. The mean node is clearly wrong. It's not exactly conjunct the sun and moon, and by definition it should be. The modern true node is. So the ancient astrologers are trying to determine when eclipses would occur. They know that this mean node would not work, and that's not what they did. They didn't actually have a mean node the way we have it today. They must have had an interpolated node. So the ancient astrologers did not calculate their mean node the way we do today. Let me say that again. The ancient astrologers had a kind of a mean node, but they arrived at its position in a different way from the way we do today. Because I'm going to tell you how we calculate the mean node today, and it's based on Kepler's laws of motion. So we calculate the mean node today based on Kepler's laws of motion. They didn't have Kepler's laws of motion. They had some other way to calculate a mean node, and they had a way to calculate a true node, such as with the Antikythera mechanism. And I'll talk later about how they probably calculated the mean node. We don't know all of the thinking that the ancient astrologers had. We don't know what they were thinking exactly because we don't have any documentation of it. We have the Antikythera mechanism, we have the chart wheels, we have various comments. We don't have clear primary sources, actual statements that explain out all those libraries were burnt and all the damage, etc. But what we do know is that some of their chart wheels have a mean node, some have a true node. We know they had a calculator, the Antikythera mechanism, for calculating the true node. That's what they did. And we know that they also have some chart wheels with a mean node. That mean node could not be calculated the way we do it today because they didn't have Kepler's laws of motion. It was probably an interpolated node. I'll talk more about this. There's a lot to unpack here, but the bottom line, so we don't get lost and keep this clear, is that the ancient astrologers clearly had a mean node and a true node, and their mean node was probably more reasonable than the mean node today, because the mean node today is not even conjunct the sun and moon at a solar eclipse, and that's the definition of a node. And they didn't have the formula for today's mean node. So, let me underscore these main points. Some ancient astrologers used a true node. That true node was not calculated as accurately as the true node today. Just like their Mercury was off up to 6 degrees sometimes. Venus could be off 2 degrees. Moon very often off 1 degree. Their calculations weren't that accurate. Their calculation of the node was not as good as today. Everything they calculated was not as good, but it was a true node. It used the Antikythera mechanism or some other tools. They had a true node. They also had a mean node, but their mean node would have to be calculated differently from the one we calculate today because they didn't have Kepler's laws of motion, which is what we're using, and their mean node probably makes more sense than our mean node because they would be wanting that mean node, the node, to be conjunct the sun and moon at the time of the eclipse because that's what they want to predict. It's probably an interpolated node. So the ancient astrologers, when they used a mean node, they calculated it differently from the way we did it today and in a way that's makes more sense because it would fit observations better because that node is conjunct the sun, and they would want a node that's conjunct the sun and moon at the time of solar eclipse because that's what a a node does. So, point number 2, many charts calculated by ancient astrologers do not have a moon's node that exactly matches the mean node, not even close. So, some of them were using some kind of a true node, and some were using a mean node that's similar to the mean node today. Now, what's interesting, and not necessarily what I expected, is that some ancient astrologers used a node position that is very close, within a few minutes of the modern mean node. They didn't calculate it the way we do today. It must have been interpolated between total eclipses. So the second paragraph, my guess is that this mean node calculation by ancient astrologers is a position interpolated between total eclipses when the moon's node is known and epicycles were not applied to these mean node positions. It was probably simply where was the total solar eclipse and where is the next total solar eclipse, and those are the new nodes, and let's just move it gradually between those two positions. I'm guessing. We don't know. They don't tell us. But they could not have used our formula today, which is based on Kepler's laws of motion, which didn't exist until the early 1600s. How else could they have done it? That's probably what they did, and it ends up being very close to the modern mean node. So they had a kind of a mean node, similar to our mean node, and they had a kind of a true node, similar to our true node. So this debate over true node and mean node has been going on, not since the 1970s, for at least 2,000 years. But it was not as big of a debate in the past because Mercury was off by 5 or 6 degrees sometimes. They had bigger problems than the moon's node, which might be off a degree. The moon was off a degree sometimes. So Venus can be wrong by 1 or 2 degrees. And, Kepler and Tycho Brahe and other people are up all night trying to get these calculations more accurate. And this has been going on for huge amounts of time. So they have big problems in trying to get the planetary positions more accurate, having the node not sure whether to use an interpolated position or a one based on the Antikythera that has epicycles, only going to make about a 1 degree difference. So these are the kind of tolerances they had in those days. They had something within about a degree that was pretty good. Venus was a bigger problem and Mercury even a bigger problem. So there you have it. Last thing I'm going to say in this video, and we're going to take a break because we're at 38 minutes now. So I'm going to stop here and we'll continue with part 2 of this. I'm going to finish up this first video in the series by referencing this PhD thesis, The Making of an Astrologer in 15th Century France. France, the notebooks of S. Bell. So Mr. Bell in Paris, France in the 1400s was an astrologer. And this student of astrology and got her PhD thesis, Helena Cristina Ferreira Avelar de Carvalho, wrote this wonderful PhD thesis, and she gives the chart wheels produced by Mr. Bell, and we see that some of these have a mean node and a true node. I'm going to stop here because this is a good stopping point because we can summarize our conclusions. We know some ancient astrologers used a true node because we now know, based on the research in 2021, that the Antikythera calculated a true node, a node corrected for epicycles. We also know that some astrologers used a mean node, but it could not be calculated with the way we do in modern times, because that uses Kepler's laws of motion, which weren't discovered until the early 1600s. So it must have been an interpolated node, which comes out and extremely close to the modern mean node. Interpolated between what? Probably between exact solar eclipses, because that's the only time we know absolutely and definitely where the moon's node is. And that's why the moon's node is so important, because it's the point where that dramatic event of the eclipse occurs. And in this PhD thesis, and here it is, by the way, in the thesis, she has a cleaned up chart wheel, which I love. You can look at this cleaned up one, which is easy to read, and she summarizes the positions under it. So it makes it very convenient. She gives the data very clearly, the date and the time. And then underneath, she shows the actual document. So there's the actual document. And in the lower left, that left column at the bottom, that's the chart wheel. Kind of scratchy looking, but she makes it clearer in this image up here. But it's the same image, just made clearer, of the one that's in the book. So it's nice. You have the actual original document. You can, zoom this in and confirm that she didn't make a typo or something. Just confirm the original, and then she summarized it. And I just entered this data in, to the Sirius software. And some of these wheels have the positions only to a degree, but there are others that give it to the minute. And then I compared it to the true node and mean node. And I found that maybe a third or so. I did maybe a dozen. I don't know how many. I did at least a dozen charts from this book. I really focused on the ones that had the minutes as well, but I did some that were just to the degree. And some of the ones to the minute were like within 2 minutes of the mean node. That must be an interpolated node that's very close to the modern mean node. And some are just completely off, 1 or 2 degrees. And sometimes closer to the true node. So it's sporadic. And in the next video, we're going to look at William Lilly and some other people, and it confirms what I'm telling you. Some astrologers used a mean node, again, calculated slightly different from the way we do it now, or very, very different calculation. It's an interpolated node, probably, is the only way I can think they could have done it, versus how we do it today, but it ends up with almost identical. So they had a kind of a mean node, and they had a kind of a true node, just like we do today. So this storyline that we've always had, that everybody used the mean node until the 1970s, and then people invented a true node. Nope, not true. They had true Mercury, Venus, and Mars. In other words, they applied epicycles, and they did it to the node as well. Okay, so the same, debate has been going on. It's a bigger debate now because now we know the other planetary positions. Mercury's not off 6 degrees. We've got it down to like a second of arc. We have these fantastically accurate calculations. The only thing we haven't resolved is the moon's node. And so I'll pick up with this in the next video in this series. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.